start with the cost of an injury. So where do we spend our money at? Well, on an accident, does it surprise you guys that about half of what we spend, and in this particular case from 2012, we spent $198 billion in 2012 on injuries, okay? When we broke that down, we spent almost $90 billion just on lost productivity and lost wages. If you think of it this way, when people go out on workers' comp and they're getting indemnity payments, which means lost wages, they only get 2/3 of their pay. They're out the first 4 days. They have to be out over 20 days to recoup those first 4 days. So they lose a lot in that process, and then they only get 2/3. And then some people will tell me, well, you know, Kirk, that's all fine and good, but they don't pay taxes on that. So they get that 2/3 pay, yeah, that kind of equals out. No, it doesn't, because think about it. You're not paying into taxes. What's going to happen at the end of the year? If you're one of those, if you're someone that's not making as much money and you get that earned income tax credit, you're not going to have as much in that aspect of it. You're going to miss out on that part of it. So let's take it a step further. Are you putting money into your retirement? No, you're losing all that time you're on workers' comp. We don't pay into your retirement for you, and we don't pay your health care costs. I mean, we do pay for according to the injury, but we don't continue to make payments so that your health insurance continues on. So you could possibly lose that. And if you got your wife, or excuse me, if you have your spouse and your kids on that, what else could happen? They're going to come off of there as well. So when we talk about this, everyone's a loser in this particular part of the corner of the world. Both management and the employees lose out whenever there's an injury, okay? We pay out over $55 billion in medical costs. How many people have had an MRI or just an X-ray recently? How much does that cost? I had an X-ray recently and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Thank goodness I have insurance, right? So if you just these medical costs are starting to climb. We're starting to actually see where the wages part isn't being as affected as much as what we're seeing with the medical costs starting to climb a little higher, because more fancier machines, they're doing more diagnostic stuff, and that's all good, but it's also a higher cost to us as well. We're paying out over $36 billion in administrative costs. Well, we have to manage those claims. We just don't send them to the doctor. You got to have a claims examiner. That claims examiner has to manage that particular claim, has to make sure that we're doing right by it, you know, that we're not just signing off on every single test the doctor wants to do, but we have to make sure that those tests mean something, that they're going to work to that particular ends, right? There has to be check and balances in the system. That's at administrative cost. You throw in the fact that we spend over $11 billion on uninsured employers. So those are employers that are trying to slip under the gate by not having to pay anything. When they do injure somebody, who pays the bill? Now in the state of Montana, we do have uninsured employers fund. There you go. And for those folks, you know, if they put in a claim, it goes nowhere, so it goes over to those folks. They come out, they fine the company. Whatever the fine is, they put it into a pot of money, and off of that pot of money, that's what they're trying to manage the claim with. But what do you find in that situation is that that fund can't handle a large group of people, and if it came down to it, who do you think's going to pay for that? The taxpayers, right? This crane, the mounting bolts for the crane itself had like something like this in diameter for those mounting bolts, you know, like 30 of them or whatever to hold them in. Well, what happened when that stress hit, it sheared those bolts. And one of the things that you see is that OSHA was actually out on the job site that day, was filming, and you can actually hear where you can start to hear that crane shear as those bolts broke, and that whole structure came over the top. Now, they killed 3 people. How many people do you think were actually injured? Countless, okay? So here's kind of what happened. This is the end result. So what you're seeing there in the blue, this is the crane that came in, okay? So you can imagine what kind of mess this created for them. Okay, so here's kind of the background to this too. They were trying to open up for that year. Now all of a sudden a delay for 1 year, so they had to hold off for another year. They had $100 million in repairs to the stadium parts that they already built, so they had to go back and fix those things, so that was $100 million. They killed 3 workers, several others were injured. They paid out well, they didn't pay out, that's still in litigation, by the way. But they had $94 million in punitive damage and $5.25 million in compensatory damages awarded to the families for the individuals that they killed, okay? So when you take that into consideration, that was huge. Well, got even a little bit more information here on the fact that prior to that April, before that happened, they were at about 27% of their premium dollars for the injury at the site. So they weren't doing too bad. They were in the ballpark with that one. Don't pardon the pun there, or pardon the pun. But they felt they needed to accelerate because they had to be open by, by opening day. So they were trying to hurry up and get this thing done. Well, what happens is that they ran into conflict with the safety director, and he says, don't do it. I'm telling you right now, if you guys start rushing, we're going to end up with an injury. I don't want to be responsible for that. So the safety director quit. I'm out of here. 2 months later is when this happened. Okay. So here's what happened to the original budget. So the original budget was around $322 million. All of a sudden, that final cost went over $850 million. And the fact that the construction cost alone, or $322 million rather, it went up to $413 million because of the repair costs, if you remember. Okay, but they also had all those other things. They also had 27 to 99 million in injury awards, and then they also had the interest on the bonds. Okay, so now they had to pay out the interest on the bonds. So what this included here, this 413, was the 100 million in repairs. So you add that to that, then that was 700. When you throw in the injury rate, that's where you get to your 850 million plus. This is what happens when, you kind of keep pushing the envelope, if you will, and you keep coming up with these things, and you kind of see where you're at.